You were just a baby abandoned in the woods. My brother's voice sliced through the laughter like a knife. The whole table erupted, silver forks clinking wine glasses, shaking their laughter echoing off the polished wood of our Vermont dining room. I smiled, my spoon hovering in midair, pretending it didn't hurt. Inside, I felt something cold and a sharp coil in my chest. I was just the broken girl at the end of the table, reminded once again that I didn't belong, that I was not a true Carter. 19 years later, Forbes would call me CEO of the Year. But tonight, that recognition was still a distant, silent promise. Snow pressed against the windows, and the world outside glowed white under the Christmas lights. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles filled the air, but all I could taste was bitterness. My mother, Margaret Carter, sat poised at the head of the table, red velvet dress flawless, her smile practiced. My father, Charles, stayed quiet, his eyes lowered toward his plate. Across from me sat Logan, my brother. His tailored navy suit hugged his frame. His expensive watch glinted with every dismissive gesture, and his smirk never faltered. I wore a sweater 2 winters old and a prosthetic leg that creaked when I shifted. It always reminded me I didn't move like the rest of them. Logan leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "You know, Mom," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "some people work for their success. Others just live off the family name." My mother chuckled, thin and airy. "Be nice, Logan. It's Christmas." He turned his gaze to me, that same mocking grin spreading. "Oh, I'm just joking. We should celebrate our little miracle, right? The wild baby Dad found in the woods." A hush rippled through the table, before the laughter came, hesitant at first, then growing. My uncle barked a laugh. My aunt covered her mouth to hide a smile. I sat still, spoon frozen, midair. "Logan, that's enough," my father murmured, his voice flat. But Logan wasn't finished. "I mean, come on. It's a great story. A crying baby half frozen in the Vermont woods, rescued by a good Samaritan. How many people can say their sister came from a fairy tale gone wrong?" My mother shook her head, smiling the way people do when they're embarrassed but too proud to admit it. "He's exaggerating," she said softly, sipping her wine. "Don't take it seriously, Lena." The laughter came again, louder this time. I stared down at my soup, my reflection warping in the silver spoon, my face twisted and small, the candlelight burning behind me. Inside, I wanted to scream, to throw the glass, to shout, "Why did you save me if all you ever do is remind me I don't belong?" But my body didn't move. My lips just curved into the faintest smile. "Guess we should be grateful," Logan continued. "If Dad hadn't found her, she'd probably be living in some foster home right now. Or worse." His fiancée Caroline, a flawless woman with perfect teeth, giggled. "That's awful, Logan." He grinned. "What, I'm kidding. She knows I love her." The word love dripped from his mouth like a lie. My father's fork clinked against his plate. He didn't look at me, but I felt the tension radiating from his side of the table. My mother poured herself another glass of wine, avoiding my eyes completely. I breathed slowly, fighting the sting in my throat. "Don't cry. Not here. Not now." The laughter faded, replaced by the hum of the fireplace and the faint sound of wind brushing against the windows. I dared to look up. Logan's grin was wide, his eyes gleaming with victory. He'd gotten exactly what he wanted, my silence. But my father's eyes met mine. For the briefest second, something passed between us. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. But his look said everything. "Hold on." I nodded slightly enough for only him to notice. My chest tightened, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was something quieter, something heavier, resolve. When dinner ended, the others drifted toward the living room, the sound of carols playing from the old record player. I cleared my plate, carried it to the kitchen, and stood alone by the sink. My reflection in the dark window looked like a ghost. Behind me, their laughter floated through the hall, warm, easy, unbroken. I climbed the stairs to my small attic room, every step echoing against the wooden floorboards. The house smelled of pine and baked apples, but my room smelled faintly of cold metal and worn blankets. It always did. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing in the silence. My prosthetic leg hissed slightly as I unlatched it, and set it beside the bed, my right thigh scarred and uneven throbbed from the long evening. I rubbed the skin gently, the memory of pain older than my mind, but written into my body. Across the room sat a small wooden wardrobe, and at the bottom, under old sweaters and forgotten things, was a suitcase, the same one I had when they found me. The leather was cracked, the handle frayed. I pulled it out and sat it on the bed. Inside was a faded baby blanket, yellowed with time, and a photograph my father, younger than, holding a tiny bundle in his arms. Snow all around. My beginning. I traced the outline of his face with my finger. He had saved me, yes. But I'd spent every day since trying to prove I was worth saving. Outside snow fell heavier, brushing softly against the window pane. The house was quiet now, the only sound was the faint ticking of the old clock downstairs. I looked down at my leg, at what was gone, at what was left, and whispered to the empty room. They think I was abandoned. But I was chosen to survive. The words came out steadier than I felt. I sat there for a while, staring at the photo, at the suitcase, at the snow swirling beyond the glass. For a moment, I imagined the woods where I'd been found, dark, frozen, silent. And I thought of that baby, the one they mocked crying alone in the cold. I wondered if some part of her still lived inside me, still reaching for warmth that never came. I closed the suitcase gently and slid it under the bed. Then I turned to the window, the world outside, silver and endless. Someday, I whispered, they'll remember this night. And they'll wish they hadn't laughed. I let the words hang in the air like frost. My breath clouded the glass, and for a second, I saw my reflection again, not small this time, not broken. Just quiet. Waiting. That night I learned silence wasn't a weakness. It was a weapon. A promise carved deeper than any scar. And 19 years later, when I stepped off that private jet with Forbes waiting to crown me Woman CEO of the Year, I kept it. I found the file by accident. It was 2 days after Christmas, the snow outside, already graying with mud and tire tracks. My parents had gone to visit relatives in New Hampshire, and Logan had flown back to Boston with his fiancée. The house was quiet for the first time in weeks, too quiet, the kind that made your own breathing sound loud. I went up to the attic to look for an old suitcase to take with me. What I found instead changed everything I thought I knew about who I was. The attic smelled of cedar and old paper. Dust floated in the thin light from the single window. Boxes stacked along the beams carried faded labels, Christmas ornaments, baby clothes, college photos. I knelt beside one marked documents, expecting tax files or insurance papers. But there it was, a small blue folder tucked between two heavy binders, the corner frayed and yellowed. On the tab in my father's handwriting it read, Lena, found child case. For a long moment I just stared at it. My hands felt numb even though the air was warm from the heater below. I told myself not to open it. But my fingers moved anyway, almost against my will. Inside were hospital reports, legal documents, and a police statement. The first line hit me like a slap. Infant female, approximately 3 days old, discovered in Pine Hollow Woods by local pastor John Miller. Found with severe leg injury, possible animal attack. My breath caught. The papers trembled in my hands. The police photo clipped to the corner showed a sterile clinical image of a bundle of blankets stained and torn, a tiny arm reaching out. My arm. I could barely look at it. Beneath the image was a line scrawled in blue ink, my father's handwriting, again adopted June 2nd, 2004. That was it. No mention of where I'd come from, who my birth mother was, or why I'd been left to die. Just a date, a location, and the word abandoned. I sat back against an old trunk, the dust rising around me in soft clouds. For years I'd convinced myself that being found didn't matter. I have a family now. But as I held that file, every word my brother had said at the Christmas table came roaring back. You were just a baby abandoned in the woods. He wasn't wrong. I closed the folder slowly and pressed it to my chest. Something inside me, some delicate belief that I belonged, cracked in half. Footsteps creaked behind me. I turned sharply, heart pounding. My father stood in the doorway, his face lined with exhaustion. He held a mug of coffee in one hand and looked at me with that same quiet sadness he'd worn at dinner. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said softly. "I think I was," I whispered. He came closer, setting the mug on a beam. "We didn't keep it from you to lie. We just thought, when you are ready, we'll tell you. When I was ready, I almost laughed. Logan already knew." He hesitated. "Yes, he overheard years ago. I asked him to keep it quiet." Clearly that didn't last. The anger rose before I could stop it. So all this time, while I tried to fit in, while I tried to earn a place at that table, he knew I was just the charity case you picked up in the woods. My father flinched at the word charity. "You were never that. You were a miracle." "A miracle," I repeated bitterly, "because you found me bleeding and half dead." He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out at the snow. "The day we found you, the priest called me. He said he'd discovered someone he couldn't explain. I went out there expecting to find a body. But when I saw you, I knew I couldn't walk away. I called your mother. We took you home." The silence between us stretched. I looked down at the folder in my lap, the words, "Found child case," staring back. "Did you ever try to find her?" I asked quietly. "My real mother?" He shook his head. "The police did for months. Nothing. No one claimed you. Maybe she was too young. Maybe I'm too scared. But I like to think," his voice faltered, "that she believed someone would save you." That word "save" hung in the air like smoke. He turned toward me, then his expression solemn. "You've spent your whole life fighting to prove yourself, Lena. You don't have to. You're already enough." I wanted to believe him, but as I looked down at the folder, something shifted inside me. Enough maybe, but not for them. Not yet. That night after he went downstairs, I sat in the attic long after the light had faded. The wind howled outside, rattling the window pane. I stared at that file until the words blurred. My fingers brushed over the photo again, the clinical image of the baby in the blanket. "She survived," I whispered. "So will I." I didn't know yet what that meant. Only that I wouldn't let their pity, their laughter, or their silence define me. If life had chosen me to live, then I'd live on my own terms. When I finally went downstairs, the house was dark except for the glow from the living room. My father had fallen asleep on the couch, the TV murmuring softly. I paused, watching him for a moment. He looked older, the weight of secrets carved into his features. In the corner, a small pile of mail lay unopened. On top was a letter addressed to my father from the hospital where I'd been taken years ago. The return address was faded, but I recognized the name Pine Hollow Medical Center. I hesitated, then slipped it into my coat pocket. Outside, the snow was still falling heavy and relentless. I walked out to the porch, the wind stinging my face. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, a hollow, lonely sound. I thought of Father Miller, the man who'd found me. Maybe he was still alive. Maybe he remembered. The next morning, I packed a small bag, nothing more than jeans, a sweater, my prosthetic maintenance kit, and the letter. My father was still asleep when I left. I stood in the doorway for a long time watching him breathe, then closed the door quietly behind me. The road to Pine Hollow was narrow, winding through miles of silent woods. Every tree looked the same, tall, bare, ghostly in the snow. When I reached the small town, it felt frozen in time. The church stood at the edge of the forest, its white paint peeling the bell tower, leaning slightly. Inside, the air smelled of wax and pine. A priest stood near the altar, older now, with hair as white as the snow outside. He turned as I approached, his eyes widening. "Father Miller," he nodded slowly. "Yes." "Do I know you?" I held up the image from the file, the clinical police photo of the infant in the torn blanket. "You found me." His lips parted, and for a moment he didn't speak. Then he whispered, "Dear God, you survived." "I did," I said quietly. "I came to ask why." He gestured for me to sit in one of the pews. The church was empty, silent, except for the creak of the old wood. He studied me for a long time before speaking. "I was walking in the woods that morning. It was bitter cold, nearly dawn. I heard crying so faint I thought it was an animal at first. When I found you, you were half buried under snow. I thought you were gone until your hand moved. You were fighting even then. I swallowed hard. Did you ever see anyone else? A woman, he shook his head. Just footprints leading away. Small ones. She must have been young. I followed them for a mile before they vanished. I prayed for her that night, and for you. His words washed over me like fog, painful, distant, inevitable. As I left the church, I paused on the steps, staring into the trees. Somewhere out there was the place I'd come from, the ground where my story began. But standing there, I realized something important. My past wasn't my prison. It was my fuel. I zipped my coat and looked up at the endless gray sky. You left me, I whispered to the wind. But I'm still here. The snow swirled harder, the cold biting against my face. I didn't turn back. Not yet. Because somewhere deep inside me, a fire had started. And I knew for the first time in my life, I would never let it die. The letter came 3 weeks later, folded neatly inside an envelope with the Pine Hollow Church letterhead. I had almost convinced myself that the visit to Father Miller was closure, that I'd learned everything there was to know about being found in the woods. But his letter said otherwise. It was short, written in trembling handwriting. Lena, after you left, I remembered something. There was a woman who used to come to the church before you were found. Young, frightened. She asked me if God forgave those who left someone behind. She never gave her name. But I think she was talking about you. The paper shook in my hands as I read. Beneath his words, a second note. If you truly wish to understand why you survived, live a life worthy of being found. That line stayed with me. For days it echoed in my head whenever I looked in the mirror or heard my prosthetic click against the wooden floor. Live a life worthy of being found. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew I couldn't stay in Vermont any longer. My father was kind when I told him I wanted to move. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a few $100s and said, "Go where you'll be seen for who you are, not where you came from." I had saved $2,000 from years of odd jobs. I packed the same suitcase, the one that had once held my baby blanket, and drove to New York with my prosthetic leg, that money, and more determination than sense. New York was everything Vermont wasn't. Loud, ruthless, alive. The streets smelled of gasoline and ambition. The first week I crashed on a classmate's couch while I applied for scholarships and internships. My prosthetic made every commute a test of endurance. Stairs, curbs, crowded subways, but I refused to use it as an excuse. At the community college where I enrolled, I studied engineering and computer science. Every night I sat in the lab long after the others left, staring at the circuits and code that seemed to breathe beneath my fingertips. Machines didn't care about pity. They didn't judge who you were before you touched them. They only responded to precision, patience, and persistence. One night while tinkering with a 3D printer, a spark hit the side of my prosthetic. The plastic melted slightly, leaving a tiny mark near the ankle joint. It didn't hurt, but the smell of burnt material stayed with me. As I stared at the mark, an idea began to take shape. Something wild, impossible, but real. What if a prosthetic could adapt itself, not just move like a limb, but think like one? The thought terrified me. It also consumed me. I started sketching designs in an old notebook, curved sensors, AI microchips that could learn walking patterns, lightweight materials that could adjust to terrain. I called it NeuroStep. For weeks I built prototypes out of scrap parts from the lab. My classmates laughed. "You're wasting your time," one of them said. "No one funds personal projects like that, especially not from someone with no connections." He wasn't wrong. The school's tech grants went to polished students with fancy resumes and family donors. I was just a quiet girl with a limp and a dream. But dreams have a way of growing teeth when you feed them with rejection. By the end of the semester, I had a crude prototype, ugly, half-functional, and barely holding together with duct tape. But when I strapped it on, something happened. The joint moved smoother than my old one. The sensors adjusted to my weight in real time. For the first time since childhood, I could run. I laughed out loud, spinning in the empty lab. The noise startled the janitor, mopping the hall. "Careful, miss," he said, grinning. "You look like you just saw a miracle." Maybe I had. I entered a startup competition that summer mostly to test my luck. The pitch took place in a converted warehouse downtown, rows of folding chairs, nervous students, and 3 judges with stone faces. My hands shook as I explained NeuroStep, an AI-driven prosthetic that adapts to the user's movement using neural feedback loops. When I finished, one of the judges, a woman named Dr. Elise Grant, leaned forward. "Did you design this yourself?" "Yes," I said, swallowing hard. "It's still crude, but it works." The second judge, a venture capitalist, frowned. "What's your background? Family in engineering?" I shook my head. "Just me. And a file that says I shouldn't be alive." They blinked, unsure how to respond. Dr. Grant smiled faintly. "Well," she said, "life seems to suit you." I didn't win the competition. But 2 weeks later, I got an email from her. "If you're serious about NeuroStep, I have a lab you can use." It was a small space in Brooklyn, cramped, cold, but mine. I spent every night there soldering wires, coding neural models, eating instant noodles, while the hum of machinery filled the air. When the first fully functional prototype came to life, it felt like holding lightning. I sent a video demo to Dr. Grant. She replied within the hour. "It's time you meet some investors." The first investor meeting was a disaster. The men in suits barely hid their condescension. One of them, a gray-haired executive, interrupted 5 minutes into my presentation. "You're saying this leg can think, yes, in a way," he laughed. "That's cute. But people don't want toys. They want reliability." I thanked them anyway, packed my things, and left. Outside, the city lights blurred with tears. For a moment, I thought about giving up selling the design to anyone who'd take it. But then I remembered the attic, the folder, the crying baby in the snow. That baby didn't quit. I worked through the nights, rewriting code, printing new components, testing every joint until my hands bled. I built 6 versions before the 7th finally moved like a muscle knot machine. When I sent the new prototype video to Dr. Grant, she called immediately. "You're ready," she said. "There's a conference next month in Silicon Valley. Be there." I didn't have the money for a plane ticket, but somehow I found a way. I pawned my laptop and borrowed an old one from the lab. I landed in California with $50 in my pocket and a suitcase full of prototypes. The conference hall shimmered with polished floors and high ceilings. Everywhere I looked, there were banners of billion-dollar companies, men in tailored suits, women in designer heels. I stood in my thrift store blazer, clutching a leg-shaped prototype, feeling like an intruder. When my turn came, I walked onto the stage, heart hammering. The spotlight felt like heat on my face. I took a deep breath. "My name is Lena Carter," I began, "and I wasn't supposed to be here. When I was 3 days old, I lost my leg in the woods. But I didn't lose my chance to walk. I built it back." The room fell silent. "This," I lifted the prototype, "is NeuroStep, a prosthetic that learns. Not from machines, but from you." A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone in the front row, an executive from a biotech firm, leaned forward. "Can we see it?" I quickly unlatched my old prosthetic, set it aside, and strapped the NeuroStep prototype onto my residual limb. I took a step, then another. The system adjusted instantly, the sensors syncing with my movement. I walked across the stage without a single limp. The audience gasped. When I stopped, I looked straight at the judges. "You laughed at smart shoes," once I said quietly, echoing the memory of my brother's voice in another house, another life. "But this is something else." The applause began softly, then grew louder, filling the hall like a wave. That night I got my first call from a real investor. Dr. Grant's voice came through the line, steady and warm. "You did it, Lena. They're interested. They see you now." I looked out the hotel window, the city lights glittering below. "No," I said softly. "They're starting to." Because deep down I knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere far away, my brother was probably raising a glass to another one of his perfect deals. He had no idea that the girl he mocked at Christmas dinner had just built something that would change both of our lives forever. The first article came out 2 months after the conference. It wasn't in Forbes, not yet, but on a mid-level tech blog called Future Front. The headline read, "One-legged engineer builds AI prosthetic that thinks like a human limb." It went viral overnight. By morning, my inbox was flooded with emails. Investors, reporters, universities asking if I would speak at their seminars. The same people who once ignored me now called me a visionary. I stared at my phone as the notifications kept flashing, my hands trembling. For the first time in my life, the world didn't look at me with pity. They looked at me with awe. Dr. Grant called that afternoon. "Welcome to the circus," she said dryly. "You're officially on the map. Now the real work begins." Her lab had become my second home, concrete floors, humming servers' walls, covered in whiteboards. Together, we registered Neurostep Technologies as a company. I was named founder and CEO, even though my apartment still had milk crates for furniture and a broken stove. The first funding round came fast, $1.2 million from a group of angel investors who wanted a piece of the next big thing. They didn't care about my story. Not really, they cared about the numbers. But I didn't mind. I wasn't here for sympathy anymore. I was here to win. Still, I couldn't escape the irony. The product I was building for people like me, those who'd lost something, was being sold to men in pressed suits who'd never missed a meal. They shook my hand and called me inspiring, but I could see it in their eyes. To them, I was still the anomaly, the broken girl who got lucky. Dr. Grant saw it too. "They'll underestimate you," she said one night as we worked on the neural interface prototype. "Let them. That's your advantage." I smiled. "You sound like you've done this before." She laughed. "I've been the only woman in a room full of men since the 90s. Trust me, being underestimated is just camouflage." We stayed in the lab until sunrise, soldering circuits and testing algorithms. When the prototype finally synced seamlessly with my neural signals, we both cheered like kids. The sensor data showed something extraordinary, a 98% adaptation rate. For the first time, the artificial limb wasn't just reacting, it was predicting. That week, Futurefront ran a follow-up story. Neurostep raises, 1.2 million founder calls it, only the beginning. My photo was on the homepage standing in front of the lab, the prosthetic leg visible under rolled-up jeans. I hadn't expected the photo to matter, but it did. Messages poured in: veterans accident survivors, parents of children with disabilities. They weren't writing about the tech. They were writing about hope. One message from a woman in Ohio stayed with me. "My son lost his leg in an accident. He's 8. He saw your picture and said, 'She's like me.' Thank you for letting him see what's possible." I printed it and pinned it above my desk. By fall, we had 5 employees, a mix of engineers, interns, and one marketing manager named Kevin, who never stopped talking about brand identity. The lab buzzed with energy even when we ran out of coffee and sleep. Every mistake, every bug, every circuit failure was another step toward something bigger. But success has a strange way of making ghosts stir. One night, while reviewing partnership emails, I saw a name that made my stomach drop: Logan Carter. The sender line glowed on the screen like a scar reopening. The subject read, "Congratulations, sis." I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won. "Saw your article. Impressive stuff. Looks like all that nerd work paid off. I've got some connections in biotech who might want to meet you. Maybe we can team up, keep it in the family." My hand froze over the keyboard. Keep it in the family. The same brother who'd mocked me every Christmas dinner now wanted a piece of my company. I didn't reply. But that night I dreamed of that snowy Vermont table again, the laughter, the wine glasses, his smirk. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. When I told Dr. Grant about it the next morning, she just said, "Success doesn't erase the past. It attracts them." Weeks passed. The company grew faster than I could keep up. We secured partnerships with hospitals across 3 states, and my name started appearing on panels and podcasts. People started calling me the comeback queen, though I'd never really had a kingdom to return to. Then Forbes called. It was a short interview request, 15 minutes, they said. Just a feature for their Women in Innovation issue. I nearly dropped my coffee while reading it. Forbes. The same magazine that had decorated Logan's bookshelf for years. The same one he used to quote at the dinner table when talking about real success. The interview took place in a glass-walled office overlooking Manhattan. I sat there looking out at the city, thinking of the quiet paneled dining room in Vermont. This time, I was the one doing the talking. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen, started with easy questions, background funding, product testing. But halfway through, she leaned forward. Do you ever think about the irony, she asked, that something born from your own pain might make you a billionaire? The question hit harder than I expected. I looked down at the prosthetic at the faint scar near the knee joint. I think I said slowly, pain teaches us precision. You stop wasting effort on things that don't matter. She smiled. That's good. Mind if I quote you on that? A week later, the headline read, From Lost Child to Tech Visionary, the woman who rebuilt herself literally. That night my father called. His voice shook with emotion. Your mother saw the article, he said quietly. She showed it to everyone. She's proud of you, Lena. We both are. I hesitated. Even Logan, a pause. He's complicated. But yes, even him. I wanted to believe that. But something in my gut told me Logan wasn't calling out of pride. He was calling out of interest. I was right. 2 days later, I received a formal proposal, an invitation from Carter Biomedical Ventures, the company Logan now co-owned. They wanted to collaborate on scaling NeuroStep globally. The email ended with, Let's make this a family empire. Family empire. The same family that once made me feel like a stranger at their table. I printed the email and stared at it until the ink seemed to blur. Then I folded it neatly and slid it into the leather suitcase I'd brought from Vermont. It was a fitting place to store the blueprints of my revenge. Dr. Grant found me staring at it later that night. You're thinking of going back, aren't you? Not yet, I said softly. But someday. When the time's right. She nodded understanding without me having to explain. Just make sure when you do, you're the one holding the fork. I smiled faintly. Oh, I will. That night I looked out over the city skyline from my apartment window. The lights shimmered like a million tiny promises. Somewhere out there my brother was plotting a reunion built on greed. But I had my own plan. I whispered to the city, to the ghosts, to the girl I used to be, next time they won't laugh. And for the first time in my life, I knew they wouldn't. It started with a phone call from my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year, not since the night I found that file in the attic and left Vermont without a word. Her voice was soft, hesitant. Lena, your brother's hosting a dinner. Thanksgiving. He wants you to come home. I froze in the middle of the lab, the soldering iron still hot in my hand. Thanksgiving, I repeated. After 19 years of being the family's punchline, she sighed. Logan's changed. He's calmer now, and your father misses you. Please, honey. Just one evening. I almost said no, but something in her tone, something tired, almost pleading, made me pause. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness I was after. Maybe it was the satisfaction of showing them who I'd become. Fine, I said finally. I'll be there. When I told Dr. Grant, she raised an eyebrow. You sure that's a good idea? Holidays are the battlefield of unresolved trauma. I know, I said, packing my laptop. That's why I'm bringing armor. Thanksgiving came cold and sharp that year. Vermont looked exactly as I'd left it. Gray skies, white fences, the smell of wood smoke curling through the air. As I drove up the long hill toward the house, memories clawed at me, the laughter, the whispers, the way my name always felt like a polite afterthought. I parked at the edge of the driveway and sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel. The house hadn't changed either. The same red shutters, the same porch light glowing in the dusk. Through the window I could see silhouettes moving, Mom in her apron, Dad setting the table. Logan's broad frame leaning against the counter like he owned the place. I sat in the car watching the scene, feeling the old familiar squeeze in my chest. The scent of pine and cinnamon carried on the cold air was exactly the same as that long ago Christmas a nostalgic, suffocating blend that promised warmth but delivered bitterness. This was the stage of my childhood torment. Every angle of the porch, every light refracting off the window pane held a memory of being made small. I had to remind myself that the girl who was leaving this car was not the one who had fled 19 years ago. That girl was running. This woman was making an entrance. I adjusted the neurostep beneath my trousers, feeling the comforting weight of the machine I had built. My armor wasn't metal. It was success integrity and the unshakable truth I now carried. I took one last deep, cold breath, letting the Vermont air sharpen my resolve and walked toward the door. When I rang the bell, it was my father who opened it. His face softened immediately. "Lena," he said, voice trembling just slightly. "You made it." "Hi, Dad." He pulled me into a hug before I could react. "You look grown." I smiled faintly. "I should hope so." Inside the house smelled of cinnamon turkey and something nostalgic that hurt to remember. My mother turned from the oven, her hand still holding a roasting pan. For a heartbeat, she just stared. Then her lips quivered into a smile. "Oh, sweetheart." She set the pan down and came to embrace me, flowers still on her apron. "You look wonderful." "Thanks, Mom." And then there was Logan. He stood by the table, glass of wine in hand, wearing a tailored gray suit. The same confident smirk I remembered curved his lips, but there was something else now, something rehearsed, brittle. "Well, well," he said, stepping forward. "If it isn't the prodigal sister." I forced a polite smile. "You invited me, remember?" He laughed. "Yeah, I did. Figured it was time we all caught up. I hear Forbes likes you these days." There it was, the first jab disguised as charm. "Among others," I said evenly. "I guess they saw something worth printing." Dinner was served shortly after. The table was dressed like something out of a magazine, candles, golden napkin rings, a centerpiece of autumn leaves. But beneath the perfection, tension coiled like wire. Mom tried to keep the conversation light. "So, Lena, tell us about your company. We saw that interview. What's it called again, Neurostep, I corrected gently. We're finalizing a deal with several hospitals next quarter." "That's incredible," Dad said, pride flickering in his eyes. "You've really built something, Lena." Across the table, Logan swirled his wine. "Hospitals, huh? I heard you got funding from some big firms out west. Who's backing you now?" I met his gaze steadily. "Private investors." "Why?" He leaned back, smiling thinly. "No reason. Just curious how you plan to scale something that expensive without more serious capital." There it was, the condescension under the mask. I set down my fork. "We'll manage. We're expanding slowly, intentionally. Quality over flash." He chuckled, spoken like someone who's never had to keep shareholders happy. "Maybe because my company isn't drowning in lawsuits," I said before I could stop myself. The room went still. My mother's fork clinked against her plate. "Lena," she said gently, "please. Let's just enjoy the meal." I exhaled, forcing a smile. "Of course." But Logan wasn't done. "You know," he said, swirling his glass again, "I've been thinking. There's real potential in what you're doing. With the right resources, our firm's reach, for instance, you could take Neurostep global overnight. Imagine that." I stared at him. "You mean your firm that's currently under federal review?" His smile froze. He took a long, sharp breath. "Don't believe everything you read. The press loves scandals." "Maybe," I said quietly. "But sometimes the scandal's real." He set his glass down, the sound sharp. "I'm offering you a chance to grow, Lena. Don't act like you're too proud for help." "Help," I repeated. "You mocked me for years. You told everyone I was a charity case. And now that Forbes calls me CEO, you suddenly remember we're family." His jaw tightened. "I was young, stupid, but I'm trying to make things right." "No," I said, leaning forward. "You're trying to make things profitable." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hiss of the fireplace. My mother's eyes darted between us, panicked. "Logan," Dad said finally, his voice low. "Enough." But Logan didn't back down. "You think you're better than us now?" "Don't you?" he snapped. You think one headline makes you invincible? I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. No, I said, my voice calm. I don't think I'm invincible. I just stopped letting your approval define what I'm worth. His face flushed. You'd still be nobody if Dad hadn't picked you up from that forest. The words landed like a blade. My mother gasped. My father closed his eyes. I smiled faintly. You're right. But the difference between us, Logan, is that I remember what it feels like to be lost. You've been lost your whole life, and you still can't see it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then I turned, picked up my coat, and walked toward the door. Lena, my mother, called softly, tears in her voice. Please don't go like this. I paused, hand on the doorknob. I'm not angry, Mom, I said without looking back. I'm just done. Outside, the cold bit into my skin. The night was silent, except for the crunch of snow under my boots. As I reached my car, I glanced back once. Through the window, I saw them still sitting there, my parents quiet. Logan motionless, the perfect family dinner finally stripped of pretense. I got into the car, my breath fogging the glass. My phone buzzed with a new notification, an email from Forbes. Congratulations. You've been nominated for Woman CEO of the Year. For a long moment, I stared at the screen, the irony burning deep in my chest. The girl who once sat at that table, invisible now, had her name printed beside the word Forbes. I whispered to the empty car, "Happy Thanksgiving, Logan." Then I started the engine and drove into the night, leaving the house and the ghosts inside it behind me. The call came the morning after Thanksgiving while I was still in my hotel room overlooking the frozen lake. I hadn't slept much. The conversation with Logan replayed in my head like a bad song, his sneer, his words, "You'd still be nobody if Dad hadn't picked you up from that forest." So when the phone rang, and I saw an unknown Vermont number, I almost ignored it. But something instinct maybe made me answer. "Miss Carter," a man's voice said. "This is Father John Miller. I believe you visited me once years ago." My heart skipped. "Father Miller, I thought you—" He chuckled softly. "Retired, yes, but not gone yet. I saw your article in Forbes. The world seems to know your name now." I sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't expect you to see that. "You were hard to forget," he said. "And there's something you should know. It's about the night you were found." The room seemed to tilt. "Go on." He hesitated. "There was someone else there that night. A hunter named Daniel Reeves. He was the one who called me after finding you. He's been looking for you ever since." "Looking for me?" "Yeah. He lives outside of Burlington now. Said he owed you the truth. I think you should hear it." My throat went dry. "Can you give me his address?" An hour later, I was on the road. Snow whipped against the windshield as I drove north through winding back roads, the radio off, my heart pounding. Daniel Reeves lived in a cabin at the edge of a frozen river. When he opened the door, I saw a man in his 60s, weathered but kind-eyed. He stared at me for a long moment before speaking. "I knew you'd come one day," he said quietly. I stepped inside. The cabin smelled of pine and coffee. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. "You were there," I said, "the night I was found." He nodded slowly. "I was hunting. It was early morning, maybe 5 a.m. I heard crying near the old trail. At first I thought it was an animal, but when I got closer, it was you, wrapped in a torn blanket, barely breathing." My chest tightened. "And the woman, she was there too," he said softly. "Not far away. I saw her before she ran." I froze. "You saw her?" He nodded again, staring into the fire. "She couldn't have been more than 18. Her clothes were muddy, her face pale. She looked back once right before she disappeared into the trees." "Did she say anything?" He hesitated. "She said, 'Tell her I'm sorry.' For a moment I couldn't breathe. The words felt like a ghost reaching out of the past. She didn't come back," he continued. "I brought you to Father Miller. I told him what I'd seen, but we agreed not to tell the police. The forest was a dangerous place for a secret that small towns weren't ready to understand." I looked at him, tears burning behind my eyes. "Why are you telling me this now?" He sighed. Because you deserve the whole story. And because she's gone now." The words landed like stones, gone. "She died 5 years ago," he said quietly. "Car accident. But before she passed, she left something behind for you." He walked to a drawer and returned with a small wooden box weathered and tied with string. My fingers shook as I untied it. Inside was a faded photo, a young woman with light hair holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Me. "She gave that to Father Miller," Daniel said. "Said the baby would understand someday." I stared at the picture for a long time. The woman's face was soft, frightened, but there was something familiar in her eyes, a shade of light I'd seen every time I looked in the mirror. "Do you know her name?" I whispered. "Sarah," he said. "Sarah Whitmore." I clutched the photo. "Do you know why she left me?" "She didn't tell me," he said gently. "But she wasn't alone when she came into those woods. There was a man with her. I think he's the reason she ran." I looked up sharply. "A man," he nodded. "Older, angry. I didn't see his face, but I remember the sound of him yelling before she disappeared. She was running from him, I'm sure of it." I felt my stomach twist. "You think that man?" He shook his head. "I can't say. But some things, Lena, some things are better faced when you're ready." I tucked the photo back into the box. "I've been ready my whole life," I said quietly. He smiled sadly. "No one ever is." We talked for hours. He told me about the search that never made the papers, about the blood on the leaves, about the rescue that almost didn't happen. By the time I left, the sun had fallen and the woods outside were a dark blur. In the car, I held the photo against the steering wheel. I had spent my life chasing answers, but now that I had one, it felt heavier than before. When I reached the city that night, I went straight to the office. Dr. Grant was still there as always, surrounded by papers and data charts. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said, glancing up. "I think I did." I handed her the photo. She studied it quietly. "Your mother, her name was Sarah. She didn't abandon me to die. She ran to save me." Dr. Grant looked up. "From who I don't know," I said softly. "But I intend to find out." She exhaled slowly, then reached into her drawer and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. "For discoveries that break you before they heal you," she said, pouring 2 glasses. I raised mine. "To the truth." We drank in silence, the hum of machines filling the space between us. Later, when I was alone in my office, I turned the photo over. On the back, written in faint pencil, were 5 words, "Live a life worth saving." It wasn't the exact phrase Father Miller had written, but the promise, the challenge was the same. I slipped the photo into my desk drawer beside my company's incorporation papers and Forbes plaque. 2 artifacts from 2 different lives, but somehow both told the same story. And for the first time, I understood what I'd been building all along. Not just a company, not just a name, a legacy that proved I wasn't abandoned. I was chosen to survive, to rise, and one day, to face the truth that waited in the shadows of the woods. But first there was something else to finish. The next morning I called my assistant. "Schedule a meeting with Carter Biomedical Ventures," I said calmly. Her voice hesitated. "That's your brother's firm." "I know," I said, staring at the city skyline through the glass. "It's time to pay him a visit." Because I wasn't the scared girl in the woods anymore. I was the woman who had built her own empire algorithm by algorithm, and this time I wasn't running. This time, I was hunting. The elevator doors opened to the 34th floor of the Carter Biomedical Building, and the familiar chill hit me like a ghost. Everything looked the same: polished marble floors, sterile lighting, the faint smell of expensive cologne that always clung to my brother's offices. Only this time, I wasn't here as the poor orphan girl he used to mock. I was here as the woman who had Forbes on speed dial. My heels clicked against the floor as I stepped out. A receptionist in a fitted black suit looked up. "Ms. Carter," she asked, her voice uncertain. "You're expected." "Good," I said. "I don't like keeping people waiting." She smiled nervously and gestured toward the glass double doors. Beyond them, I could see Logan's reflection in the window, standing tall, confident, talking animatedly to a group of men in suits. He was still the golden boy, still radiating the same effortless arrogance that used to make every room orbit around him. When he finally turned and saw me, his grin froze for a fraction of a second. Then he recovered. Well, well. Look who decided to visit her big brother. I stopped a few feet away. I got your invitation. You wanted to talk business. He motioned to the men behind him. Gentlemen, this is my sister, Lena Carter, CEO of Neurostep Technologies, the new darling of Forbes. They offered polite handshakes, the kind that said we've read about you, but we don't quite believe it's real. Logan gestured to the glass conference room. Let's catch up in private. Inside, the air was colder. A long mahogany table stretched between us, the city skyline glowing in the background. Logan poured himself a glass of whiskey. You want one? No, I said. Let's skip the warm-up. He smiled, that same sharp, calculating expression that used to make my skin crawl. Straight to the point. Fine. We've been following your company's growth. Impressive numbers, though I imagine scaling is getting tricky. We're handling it, I said. Sure. He took a sip. But you could be handling it better with the right partners. Carter Biomedical has the infrastructure, the investors, the global distribution channels. I'm offering you an acquisition. Neurostep becomes part of us. You stay on as head of development. Everyone wins. I leaned back. Everyone. He nodded. You get access to unlimited resources. We get to expand into the AI prosthetics sector. It's synergy, Lena. Family synergy. The word family rolled off his tongue like oil. I smiled faintly. And how much of Neurostep would I keep? He hesitated just long enough for me to catch it. A small stake. 10%? Maybe 15%. Standard structure. I laughed quietly. You want to buy my company for pennies after mocking it for years. Mocking, he said with false innocence. That's ancient history. You've done well. I'm proud of you. I stood slowly, circling the table. Proud of me, or threatened by me. His smile faltered. Don't flatter yourself. Oh, I'm not. I read the financial reports, Logan. Your firm's under investigation again. SEC filings. Debt restructurings. You're bleeding money. His jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I stopped beside him, lowering my voice. You're desperate. You need a lifeline. And you thought I'd hand you one wrapped in ribbon? He set the glass down too hard, amber liquid spilling over his fingers. Careful, Lena. Don't talk to me like you know this world. I met his eyes. I built mine from nothing. You inherited yours. The difference is, I can rebuild. You can't. He stared at me, breathing hard, the charming mask slipping. I was the one who looked after you when Dad brought you home, he hissed. I gave you a room clothes, a family name. And this is how you repay me. You didn't give me a family, I said quietly. You gave me walls. I broke out of them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city lights glinted off the glass behind him, throwing fractured reflections across his face. Finally, he exhaled sharply, the anger fading into something colder. You'll regret this, he said. When your investors start pulling out, when the press moves on, when you're left alone again, don't say I didn't try to help. I smiled. You're right about one thing. I'll be alone, but at least I'll still have integrity. The door opened and his assistant poked her head in. Mr. Carter, your next appointment, cancel it, he snapped. I turned toward the door. Don't bother, I said. We're done here. Outside the conference room, I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands trembled, but it wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. The elevator ride down felt endless. When I finally stepped out into the lobby, I pulled out my phone and called Dr. Grant. How'd it go? She asked. Exactly as expected. He wants to buy us out for scraps. And I said no. A pause. You're sure that's wise? He'll retaliate. I'm counting on it. I ended the call and walked out into the cold Manhattan air. Snow had started to fall again, soft flakes catching in the streetlights. The city hummed around me, indifferent and alive. As I waited for a cab, my phone buzzed a notification from an anonymous sender. I frowned and opened it. It was a screenshot of an email thread. Subject line, Confidential Neurostep Patent Review. The message underneath was short but chilling. He's trying to claim your design isn't original. Prepare yourself." My pulse quickened. I knew exactly who he was. By the time I reached my apartment, another message arrived from our legal department. Logan Carter has filed a preliminary claim with the U.S. Patent Office alleging overlap between NeuroStep's neural interface and Carter Biomedical's adaptive limb patents. It was war. I paced the room, fury rising in waves. My brother wasn't just trying to humiliate me now, he was trying to erase me. I opened my laptop, typing furiously, forwarding the documents to our attorneys. Then I stopped and stared at my reflection in the dark screen. The girl who once hid behind silence was gone. This woman had a company, an army of engineers, and a story that could burn him to ashes. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. "You wanted a fight, Logan. Fine. But you should have remembered I know how to survive the woods." The next morning, I called my PR director. "Prepare a statement," I said. "If they want to drag our name through the mud, we'll tell the whole world where we came from and what we stand for." Within 24 hours, every major outlet had the story. CEO of NeuroStep faces patent challenge from brother's firm. But the narrative shifted fast. Interviews poured in. Reporters didn't see a scandal, they saw a David versus Goliath fight. Headlines read, "From abandoned baby to billion-dollar CEO. Now she faces her family in court." Investors called. Support skyrocketed. The world, it seemed, loved a survivor story, and this time I wasn't hiding mine. By the end of the week, Forbes published an editorial, "When Legacy Meets Innovation, Why Lena Carter Represents the Future of Tech." Meanwhile, Carter Biomedical's stock dipped 6% overnight. I watched the market numbers flicker on my monitor, the irony sharp as glass. He had thrown me out of the family years ago with nothing but a suitcase. Now I was the one holding the pen that could write the end of his empire. And I intended to do it slowly, methodically, the way a surgeon removes a tumor piece by piece until there was nothing left. The headlines hit faster than even I expected. By Monday morning, every major financial outlet carried the same breaking story: Carter Biomedical under SEC investigation for accounting irregularities. I didn't have to read between the lines. Logan's company wasn't just in trouble, it was crumbling. The same brother who used to toast at family dinners bragging about his record-breaking mergers now had his face splashed across every business channel in America. I sat in my office watching the TV in silence as an anchor read the report aloud. Sources claim internal documents suggest intentional misreporting of revenue streams and fabricated subsidiary transactions tied to overseas shell accounts. My assistant hovered near the doorway. "Do you want me to turn it off?" I shook my head slowly. "No, let it play." The anchor's voice continued sharp and merciless. Carter Biomedical's stock has fallen 22% since Friday. Investors are demanding explanations, and CEO Logan Carter has not responded to multiple requests for comment. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the screen. There he was, my brother, pale, sweaty, caught in a flash of cameras outside his Manhattan office. Reporters shouted questions, microphones lunged toward him. His perfect composure was gone. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, and part of me did. But another part, the one that still remembered being the little girl at that long Vermont table, mocked for her stupid little inventions, felt something colder. No pity, just inevitability. Dr. Grant walked in carrying 2 coffees. "So the mighty have fallen," she said, setting one in front of me. "Looks like it," I said. "Are you ready for what comes next?" I looked at her. "What comes next?" She smirked. "When people like your brother start to drown, they don't go quietly. They drag whoever's closest down with them." She wasn't wrong. By that afternoon, my inbox was a war zone. Journalists, investors, analysts, everyone wanted a quote. Had I known about the investigation? Was my brother's downfall connected to the patent lawsuit? Was NeuroStep clean? I ignored them all. For now. Instead, I called my father. He answered on the second ring, his voice weary. "Lena." "Dad," I said softly. "I saw the news." A heavy sigh. "So did everyone. Your mother hasn't stopped crying. Is he okay? I don't know. He won't answer my calls. The board's forcing him to step down. They're saying he falsified numbers to hide losses. I closed my eyes. Did he? I wish I could say no, Dad said quietly. But your brother's been playing too close to the edge for years. There was a pause, then his voice broke slightly. I don't know what happened to him, Lena. Somewhere along the way, ambition turned to greed. I swallowed the lump in my throat. It runs in the family. No, he said firmly. It doesn't. You built something that helps people. He built something that helps himself. That's the difference. When we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Outside the city glittered under the winter sun, indifferent as ever. The next morning I woke to a voicemail from Logan. His voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. Lena, I need to talk to you. Please. You're the only one who'll still pick up. He was wrong about that last part. I didn't pick up. Not yet. But I didn't delete it either. By evening, the situation had worsened. Carter Biomedical's offices were swarmed with reporters. Employees were quitting in droves. On social media, hashtags like #CarterCrash and #FallenGoldenSun trended for hours. The empire he'd spent a decade building was collapsing in real time. And then came the part no one saw coming. A message from a Forbes editor popped up on my phone. We're updating our cover story. Would you agree to a follow-up interview? The contrast between your rise and your brother's fall is compelling. Compelling. That was the word they used. As if my life and his ruin were just another narrative thread for public consumption. Still, I agreed. Not out of vanity, but because silence would let others write my story for me. The interview took place 3 days later. The reporter, a sharp-eyed man named Michael, leaned forward as the cameras rolled. Lena, you and your brother built very different paths. When you see what's happening to him now, what do you feel? I took a breath. I feel proof. He blinked. Proof that you can't build an empire on lies, I said calmly. And that no one, no matter how powerful, is immune to accountability. It wasn't the answer he expected. But it was the truth. When the article came out, the headline was brutal, from the woods to Wall Street, how one sibling rose while the other fell. The photo showed me standing beside the NeuroStep prototype, calm and poised. Below it, a smaller image of Logan eyes, downcast face, caught mid-expression, the perfect symbol of defeat. The article went viral overnight. And that's when he finally showed up. It was late past midnight when the building's security called. Mr. Carter is here. Should I send him up? I hesitated, then told them to let him up. When the elevator doors opened, I barely recognized him. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his eyes red. The golden sun was gone. Lena, he said, voice shaking. I didn't know where else to go. I folded my arms. That's new for you. He flinched. I deserve that. I deserve worse. He stepped closer, desperation in his face. You have influence now, connections. If you could just speak to your investors, tell them I'm not what I cut in. Not guilty, not the man who tried to steal my company, not the brother who told me I didn't belong in this family. He looked down. I was wrong. About everything. I stared at him, searching for even a trace of sincerity. You said once I was just a baby abandoned in the woods. You used that to humiliate me every Christmas, every dinner, every time I tried to speak. Do you even remember? He nodded slowly. I remember. And I wish I didn't. I studied with him. You built your kingdom on pride. I built mine on pain. And pain lasts longer. Tears filled his eyes. Lena, please. I've lost everything. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You haven't lost everything. You still have your time. You still have your father. You still have a choice what kind of man you want to be when there's nothing left to hide behind. He blinked. And what about you? Don't you want revenge? I smiled faintly. I already got it. It's called peace. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The city lights flickered behind the glass, reflecting two people who shared blood, but not the same soul. Then I turned away. There's a car waiting downstairs, I said quietly. It'll take you somewhere safe. But that's all I can do. Lena, goodbye, Logan. He didn't follow. As the elevator doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of him standing alone in the hallway, shoulders slumped, head bowed. That night I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the snow fall over Manhattan. Somewhere below, cameras flashed, headlines churned, and the world whispered about the Carters, the fallen, and the risen. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the baby abandoned in the woods. I felt like the silence that came out of it. The first snow of December came early that year, falling thick and quiet over Vermont, like the past refusing to stay buried. I hadn't been back to that cabin since the day Daniel Reeves told me about my mother. But now something pulled me north again, a restlessness I couldn't name, a whisper that wouldn't stop echoing in my dreams. The court had cleared me of any involvement in Logan's scandal weeks ago. Forbes had named me Woman CEO of the Year. The stock was soaring. Investors called me the future. And yet none of it filled the hollow space I felt every night when the city lights went out. So I drove. Alone. No driver, no assistant, no headlines. Just me and the road. When I arrived at Daniel's cabin, the door was ajar. I hesitated before stepping inside. The fire was out and the air was cold, but on the wooden table sat an envelope with my name written in trembling script. Daniel. I called softly. No answer. I opened the letter with shaking hands. Lena, if you're reading this, I'm gone. My heart wasn't built to last this long. But before I left, there's something you need to know. You weren't found by accident. The man your mother was running from, he wasn't a stranger. He was someone close, someone powerful. I didn't tell you before because you weren't ready. But now you are. Go to the old church on Millstone Road. In the back pew, there's a box buried beneath the floorboard. It will tell you everything. I sank into the chair, my pulse hammering in my ears. The firelight flickered against the window, the woods beyond silent and white. Someone close. Someone powerful. Only one name formed in my mind. I drove to Millstone Road before dawn, headlights cutting through the fog. The church stood abandoned, its steeple cracked, its doors chained loosely with rusted links. I broke them open easily and stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and time. My breath clouded in front of me as I walked down the center aisle past rows of empty pews. The place felt haunted by faith, by fear, by the secrets people once confessed and left behind. The back pew creaked as I knelt beside it. I ran my hands along the floorboards until I found one that shifted slightly under pressure. Using a piece of metal from my pocket knife, I pried it open. There, beneath decades of dirt, was a small tin box wrapped in wax paper. Inside were a stack of yellowed documents and a folded photograph. The picture showed a man and a woman, my mother Sarah Whitmore, unmistakable even in youth. And beside her smiling was a younger version of my adoptive father, Charles Carter. My stomach turned cold. I flipped through the papers, letters, bank drafts, and one birth certificate, mine. Only it didn't list father unknown like the copy I'd grown up seeing. This one had a name. Charles, Edward, Carter, his full name. The name my mother had known. I froze. He wasn't just the man who adopted me. He was the man my mother had been running from. The truth hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. He had found her, used his influence, buried the story, and kept me under his roof all these years as his dirty secret, his penance hidden in plain sight. I stumbled out of the church into the cold air, gasping. The snow fell heavier now, blurring the world into white noise. I fell to my knees, clutching the papers to my chest, choking on the taste of betrayal. My whole life. Every cruel word from Logan, every distant look from Dad. It all made sense now. I wasn't just a reminder of something broken. I was the consequence of his sin. By the time I got back to the city, dawn was breaking over the skyline. My hands were still shaking when I called my lawyer. "I need you to find something," I said, my voice raw. Every sealed record connected to Charles Carter between 19 years ago and now. "I don't care what it costs." "Understood," he said immediately. Then I called my father. He answered on the third ring voice, rough with sleep. Lena. It's early. What's wrong? I think you should tell me the truth, I said. A long pause. About what? About my mother. About the night in the woods. Another silence. I could almost hear his breath catch. Lena. Where are you getting this? I found the box, I said quietly. The one in Millstone Church. I know. He said nothing. Say something, I demanded. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and broken. I tried to stop it. I swear I did. But your mother, she wouldn't listen. What did you do to her? I loved her, he said. More than I was supposed to. She was young, scared, and I promised to take care of her. But when she got pregnant, his voice cracked. She wanted to tell my wife. She wanted to keep you. I couldn't let that happen. My stomach twisted. So you chased her into the woods. He didn't deny it. I never meant to hurt her. I just wanted to stop her from ruining everything. I pressed my hand against my mouth, fighting nausea. You left me there to die. I went back for you, he said desperately. You have to believe that. But by the time I returned, you were gone. Someone had already found you. So I did what I could. I adopted you. I made sure you had a life, a name, a future. You made sure your reputation survived, I spat. You built a lie and raised me inside it. He was crying now, I could hear it. I thought I could make it right. I laughed bitterly. Right. You let your son treat me like trash. You stood by while he called me a freak, a mistake. You watched me limp through every Christmas dinner with a prosthetic leg, and you said nothing. Because I was afraid, he shouted. Afraid of what you'd think of me. Afraid of losing you. You lost me 19 years ago, I whispered. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Only the hum of the city filled the silence between us. Finally, he said, What are you going to do? I stared out the window, watching the sunrise burn through the fog. What I've always done, I said softly. Turn what you broke into something stronger. Lena, please. Goodbye, Dad. I ended the call and let the phone fall from my hand. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, steady, unflinching, alive. I wasn't the lost child anymore. I wasn't the secret he buried. I was the truth he couldn't hide. And this time, I wouldn't stay quiet. The next morning, my team found me in the office surrounded by old photos and legal files. Dr. Grant leaned against the doorframe. You didn't go home last night, did you? I looked up. No. But I found my story. She frowned. Your story. My real one. I said. The one he tried to erase. I handed her the birth certificate. Her eyes widened. Oh my God. I nodded. I'm going to tell it publicly. Not as an accusation, as a declaration. People deserve to know the truth about where I came from and how far I've come despite it. She hesitated. Are you sure you want that it'll destroy what's left of him? I'm not doing it to destroy him, I said quietly. I'm doing it to free myself. Outside the city buzzed with life, the world already spinning toward another day of business, ambition, and noise. But I knew something had shifted forever. The woods hadn't taken me. They had delivered me, and I was done hiding from what they'd given back. The press conference was scheduled for 9:00 a.m., but by 8:15, the lobby of the Waldorf Grand was already packed with cameras, reporters, and the low electric hum of curiosity. The air smelled like coffee perfume and ambition. Every major network had shown up: Forbes, CNBC, The Times, even Vanity Fair. My communications director, Ava, paced beside me, holding a tablet. You're sure you want to do this, Lena? Once this goes public, there's no putting it back in the box. I stared at my reflection in the tall mirror, adjusting the collar of my navy suit. I've lived my whole life in someone else's box, I said quietly. It's time to burn it. Outside the glass doors, I could see the crush of microphones waiting like vultures circling a secret they could smell. Ava sighed. Then let's make sure they choke on the truth. At 9:00 sharp, I stepped onto the stage. The lights hit hard white, blinding, but I didn't flinch. Good morning, I began, my voice steady. My name is Lena Carter, CEO of Neurostep Technologies. For most of my life, I believed a lie about who I was and where I came from. Today I'm here to tell you the truth. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. I continued, 19 years ago I was found abandoned in the woods, outside a small Vermont town. I grew up believing I was an orphan. But recently, I discovered that the man who adopted me, the late Charles Carter, was not my savior. He was my biological father. And the reason my mother ran into those woods was because she was trying to escape him. The room fell silent. Cameras clicked like gunfire. "I'm not here to destroy his legacy," I said. "I'm here to reclaim my own." Someone from the front shouted, "Are you saying your father was guilty of a crime?" I met their gaze. "I'm saying he was human. He made choices out of fear and power, and those choices shaped my life. But they don't define it." Another reporter raised a hand. "Why come forward now after his death?" "Because silence protects the wrong people," I said. "And I've been silent long enough." Behind me a screen flickered to life, showing a slideshow of Neurostep's achievements, rehabilitation programs, patients walking again, communities changed. "This," I said. "Gesturing to the screen is what I've built from the ashes of that story. My mother's fear gave me life. My father's guilt gave me shelter, but my own determination gave me purpose." The applause came slowly at first, then louder, stronger, a wave breaking through the tension. I felt tears sting my eyes but blink them away. To every woman who's ever been told her pain should stay quiet, this is for you. To every child who was told they were unwanted, your beginning doesn't decide your ending. When I stepped off the stage, my phone was already vibrating non-stop. Messages, notifications, missed calls. But one name made me stop cold. Logan. I hesitated, then opened it. It wasn't a text. It was a video. The shaky footage showed a dimly lit hospital room. Logan sat beside a bed, his face, pale eyes hollow. "He's gone," he said, his voice breaking. "Dad's gone." The phone slipped from my hand. Ava caught it before it hit the floor. "Lena," I took a step back, dizzy. "He's dead." The next few hours blurred into a haze of travel arrangements and silence. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat by the window of the private jet, staring at the clouds, like they could explain why grief always felt so much like drowning. When we landed in Vermont, the winter air bit at my face. The Carter estate looked smaller now, stripped of its power. Reporters lingered by the gates, but security kept them back. Inside, the air was thick with flowers and quiet regret. Logan stood near the fireplace, a glass of scotch in hand. He looked older, emptied out. "You came," he said softly. I nodded. He was still my father. We stood in silence for a long moment. The crackle of the fire was the only sound between us. Finally, he said, "I saw your press conference. I'm sure you did. You told the truth." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "He deserved it." That surprised me. "You're not angry?" He gave a hollow laugh. "Angry, Lena. I spent my whole life trying to impress a man who couldn't even live with what he'd done. I used to think you were the family's shame. Turns out, you were the only honest one." I studied with him. For the first time, I saw not the brother who mocked me, but the man who had grown up under the same shadow. "I didn't want it to end like this," I said quietly. "None of us did," he said. "But maybe it had to." He handed me a small wooden box. "He wanted you to have this." I opened it carefully. Inside was a locket, tarnished and old. I clicked it open. Inside was a photo of my mother holding me as a baby. On the opposite side, a note etched in tiny script, "Forgive me." Tears finally came, silent and uncontrollable. I hated the secret he carried, but I think I finally understood the man. Logan nodded. "That's how it works. Love and hate aren't opposites. They're the same weight on different scales." For the first time in years, we stood side by side, not as enemies, but as something fragile and unspoken survivors. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked out into the woods behind the house. The snow was deep, the trees tall and silent. I stopped at the edge of the clearing where I'd once been found. The moonlight spilled across the ground, and I whispered to the shadows, "I forgive you. Both of you." The wind stirred through the trees, soft and steady, as if the woods themselves were exhaling. When I returned to the house, I found Logan sitting on the porch, staring into the dark. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Every day." "Then what now?" "CEO of the year." "Now," I said, sitting beside him, "now I build something that lasts longer than pain." He nodded. "I'd like to help." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw not my rival, but my brother. "Then let's start with the truth," I said, "and build a better table." The dawn broke slowly, spilling gold light through the trees. For the first time in 19 years, I didn't feel like I was running from the woods. I felt like I was walking out of them, finally free. Spring came early that year, soft and golden over the Vermont hills. The air no longer bit at the skin, it wrapped around me like something forgiving. I hadn't been back to my childhood home since the funeral, and yet there I was again, standing at the old iron gate, watching sunlight ripple through the branches like pieces of memory. The Carter estate looked different now, smaller, quieter. The echoes of laughter and resentment had faded into the woodwork, leaving only the ghosts of who we used to be. Logan stood by the porch waiting. He wore a worn jacket and jeans, a stark contrast to the tailored suits he used to favor. For the first time, he looked human. No polish, no pretense. "You came," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I told you I would," I replied. He opened the door and the scent of old wood and coffee drifted out. I made breakfast. Or at least tried to. I laughed softly. "That's a first. Don't get used to it," he said. "It's edible at best." The dining room was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just grown too much to fit inside those walls of expectation. The table, once the stage of every family humiliation, stood bare except for 2 plates and a vase of wildflowers. This was the new table built on honesty. I sat down, running my fingers along the edge of the table, where years ago I'd carved my initials with a dull knife when no one was looking. LC, the mark of a girl who wanted to be seen. Logan poured the coffee and sat across from me. For a moment, the silence stretched between us like glass. "I read your Forbes interview," he said finally. "Oh, they called you the face of ethical innovation," he said, almost smiling. "I remember when Mom used to call you the family embarrassment." "People change," I said. "Do they?" He looked up, eyes tired but honest. "I keep wondering if I can." "You already have," I said simply. "You showed up." He looked down at his cup. "After Dad died, I thought I'd feel relief. Like maybe his shadow would finally lift. But it's still there. I still hear him every time I open my mouth." "Then stop speaking like him," I said. "Start speaking like you." He laughed quietly. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," I said, "but it's possible." We ate in silence for a while, the kind that didn't hurt anymore. When the dishes were cleared, Logan reached under the table and pulled out an old photo album. The leather cover was cracked, the pages yellowed. "I found this in his office," he said, sliding it toward me. "You should see what's inside." I hesitated before opening it. The first photo was of my mother Sarah smiling beside the lake, holding a baby in her arms. Me. The next showed Dad standing in the background, watching her with an expression I couldn't name. Love, regret, fear, maybe all 3. The following pages were filled with letters, her handwriting delicate but strong. "For Lena when she's old enough to understand." I traced the ink with my fingers. "She wrote to me," I whispered. Logan nodded. He kept them, every single one. I turned the page and began to read. "My sweet girl, if you ever find this, I hope you know that running wasn't about leaving you. It was about saving you. Sometimes love means walking away before the world can take everything from you. But I believe in you. I always did." My throat tightened. "She knew," I said softly. "She knew I'd make it out." "Maybe she did," Logan said. "Maybe she saw what the rest of us were too blind to." I closed the album and exhaled slowly. "I'm going to find her grave," I said. "She deserves to be more than a secret in a box." He nodded. "I'll go with you." We drove through the narrow mountain roads until we reached a small clearing overlooking the valley. The churchyard was quiet, a thin fog curling around the old headstones. I found her name near the back, Sarah Whitmore, beloved daughter and mother. Someone had placed fresh lilies at the base of the stone. I knelt beside it, brushing away a layer of frost. "Hi, Mom," I whispered. It took me a while, but I found my way back. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of spring. I placed the locket, Charles's final gift, on the grave. "He said he was sorry," I added. "I think he meant it, even if it came too late." Logan stood behind me, hands in his pockets. "You think she can hear you? I know she can," I said. "She's been with me all along." We stood there in silence, two survivors of the same storm finally facing the calm. As we walked back to the car, Logan said, "You ever think about what's next?" "All the time," I said. "NeuroStep's expanding into prosthetic neurointegration. We're launching a foundation in Mom's name, free technology for kids born with mobility loss." He smiled. "That sounds like something she'd be proud of." "I hope so," I said. "But it's not about pride anymore. It's about legacy." Back in the car, he turned to me. "You know there's one more thing I need to do." "What's that?" He hesitated. "I owe you an apology. For every cruel word, every dinner where I laughed at you, every time I made you feel like you didn't belong." I looked at him, eyes soft. "You don't owe me anything, Logan. We were both just kids trying to survive the same lie." He nodded slowly. "Still, I'm sorry." And for the first time in 19 years, I believed him. When we reached the edge of the property, I looked back at the woods, those same trees that had once nearly claimed my life. But this time, they didn't look dark or haunted. They looked alive. The road stretched ahead, golden in the fading light. Logan broke the silence. "You think we'll ever be okay?" I smiled faintly. "We already are." He laughed under his breath. "So where to now?" "CEO of the year." I turned to him, eyes glinting. "Home. But not the one we came from, the one we build next." As the car rolled down the mountain, I opened the window and let the wind rush through my hair. The past, the pain, the lies, they didn't disappear. But they didn't own me anymore. I had come full circle from the baby abandoned in the woods to the woman who built her own empire from the ground up. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't running toward success or away from shame. I was simply free. The day Forbes called again, I was standing on the balcony of my new home overlooking the Pacific. Morning sunlight spilled across the horizon, the waves below crashing against the cliffs in a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The air smelled of salt and citrus, and for the first time in my life, I felt no weight pressing down on my chest. I had come a long way from the girl who sat silent at a Christmas dinner while her brother mocked her. From the baby found crying in a forest to the woman whose name now appeared beside Forbes Woman's CEO of the Year. 19 years had passed since that night in the woods. 19 years of being told who I was, what I couldn't do, what I didn't deserve. And yet, here I was alive, whole, stronger than any of them ever imagined. When the call ended, I set my phone down and walked back inside. The walls of my study were lined with letters, handwritten notes from patients who had walked again because of NeuroStep, from parents who thanked me for giving their children hope. Some of the letters were framed. Others were tucked into glass boxes like keepsakes. There was one in particular that I touched every morning before starting my day. It was from a young girl named Maddie, born with one leg, who had written in bright pink ink, "Because of you, I don't hide my scars anymore. I race with them." That letter meant more to me than every award, every headline, every dollar in my bank account. It was proof that what I built out of pain had turned into purpose. The doorbell rang, breaking my thoughts. I turned, expecting Ava or one of my assistants, but when I opened the door, it was Logan. He looked better than he had in years. The anger was gone, replaced by something quiet, humble. He held a paper bag and a bottle of wine. You always were impossible to surprise, he said with a grin. I had to learn early, I said, stepping aside to let him in. He looked around the house, whistling under his breath. So this is how CEOs live. Only the ones who used to sleep in labs, I replied. Wine. He nodded, setting the bag on the counter. I brought takeout from Mom's favorite place. Though we could have dinner, no cameras, no speeches. I smiled, just family. We ate on the terrace, watching the sunset bleed orange into the ocean. For once, there were no pretenses between us. Just two people who had survived each other. After dinner, Logan leaned back in his chair, staring at the horizon. You know, I used to think success was about winning. Having the best job, the biggest house, the loudest applause. But now I see, it's about peace. I nodded. Peace takes longer to earn than any promotion. He looked at me. Have you ever thought about him, Dad? Sometimes, I said. But not with anger anymore. I think he knew what he destroyed. And maybe that's enough punishment. He was quiet for a while, then said softly, He'd be proud of you, you know. I smiled faintly. Maybe. But I think Mom would be proud. Logan raised his glass. To Sarah Whitmore. I lifted mine. To every woman who ran so her daughter could stand. We clinked glasses, the sound soft against the ocean's roar. Later that night, after Logan left, I sat alone in my study. The moonlight spilled across the floor, catching on the silver frame of my latest plaque, Forbes Woman CEO of the Year. I picked it up, stared at my own reflection in the glass, then set it down beside the photo of my mother. Her smile stared back at me, soft and eternal. See, Mom, I whispered. I made it out of the woods. My phone buzzed a message from Ava. Forbes wants a quote for their profile headline tomorrow. Something about resilience or revenge, they said. I typed back, tell them it's not revenge, it's restoration. Then I set the phone aside. I walked out to the balcony again, the night air cool against my skin. The city lights shimmered below a constellation of human ambition. But above them, the stars glowed quieter, older, uncaring of money or legacy, yet infinitely more enduring. I thought of every night I'd spent chasing approval, every time I'd begged for recognition. The cruel laughter at the dinner table, the years of scraping by in labs, the rejection emails, the humiliation. All of it had forged me. People always say, revenge feels sweet. They're wrong. Revenge feels hollow. What fills you isn't their downfall, it's your rise. Forgiveness is heavier than rage, but it sets you free in ways vengeance never can. The next morning, I flew to Vermont alone. No assistants, no press, just me and a single suitcase. I drove up the familiar winding road until I reached the clearing where it had all begun. The woods were alive again, green open, no longer haunting. At the center of the clearing stood a small bronze plaque. I had it placed there months ago. It read, "Dedicated to the lost children who became their own rescue." I stood there for a long while, the wind rustling through the leaves. This is where it started, I murmured. And this is where it ends. I took the photo of my mother from my coat pocket and placed it at the base of the plaque. Then I whispered the words she had left me. Live a life worth saving. And I had. When I turned to leave, I didn't look back. The woods no longer held me. They released me. Back in the city, the next few weeks blurred with interviews and meetings. But something had shifted inside me. I didn't chase validation anymore. I carried it quietly. One afternoon, I spoke at a leadership summit. The stage lights were blinding, just like that first press conference months ago. But this time I wasn't nervous. I felt calm, grounded. I began my speech the same way I began my life story. Once I was a child left in the woods. People said I'd never walk, never belong, never matter. But life has a strange way of proving that what tries to break you becomes what builds you. The forest that almost killed me became the metaphor that saved me. The audience was silent. You could feel the air shift. When people mock you, when they doubt you, when they say, "You're nothing, remember this," you don't owe them anger. You owe yourself greatness. After the applause faded, I stepped off the stage. Reporters rushed forward, but I brushed past them, heading toward the exit. Outside, the sky was streaked with orange and pink. I breathed deeply, letting the noise fade behind me. Success, I realized, wasn't the award, the company, or the recognition. Success was walking through the same world that once broke you and feeling nothing but peace. That night, as the waves crashed below my balcony and the stars blinked awake above, I poured a glass of wine and whispered to no one in particular, I made it. But even that wasn't quite right. I didn't just make it. I became everything they said I couldn't. And that was the truest victory of all. To anyone listening, to every woman who's ever been dismissed, to every daughter told she was lucky just to survive, remember, this survival isn't the end. It's the beginning. The world may have given you scars, but only you decide if they become your burden or your blueprint.